June the 2nd, 2023. Guys, a few months ago we went through the complete book of Revelation, and if you look down in the sections from our main page, you look at the playlist, you'll see there that you have all 22 books of the book of Revelation that we went through chapter by chapter, verse by verse, and kept it very simple. I think it is well worth your time. Now, in Revelation 2, one of the things that's looked over quite a bit in the New Testament is what they're talking about as Christ talks to the church of Ephesus. And we're starting to see this. We're in the study of the book of Enoch. We're starting to see things that were looked over there. We go back and look a little closer and look at some of the things Christ said and look a little closer. We start to see the light bulb come on and get a little deeper into the actual message itself. But many people read over this, and it's Revelation 2:1, and Christ has come in. He's going to give the messages to all seven churches. They're all, they say they're in Asia, and that is now Western Turkey on the Aegean Sea across from Greece there. And that's why there's so many Roman and Greek temples in that area, because it was very pagan at that time. Now, these seven churches were all on that western tip of Turkey, what we call Turkey now. And so this was about the churches in Asia. Now here, and as Christ is giving the message to the church in Ephesus, he says, unto the angel of the church of Ephesus write, these things saith he that holdeth the seven stars in his right hand, who walketh in the midst of the seven golden candlesticks. Seven golden candlesticks, guys, were the seven angels, okay, of the churches. I know thy works, and thy labor, and thy patience, and how thou cannot bear them which are evil. And thou hast tried them which say they are apostles, and are not, and hast found them liars. God, there's so much in Revelation 2:2 that I just read that is completely looked over. Who was Christ talking about? Who was he angry with? Who was tried in Ephesus? It says, and has borne and has patience, and for my name's sake has labored and has not fainted. Nevertheless, I have something against thee, because thou hast left thy first love. Remember therefore whence thou art fallen, and repent, and do the first works, or else I will come unto thee quickly, and will remove thy candlestick out of its place, except thou repent. Now, what were the first works? Christ had sent his messengers across Asia and established some of these churches. That was the first works. They believed in the words of Christ. Then someone came along, Roman Catholic, said he was Christian. The church of Ephesus, after about 3 months of listening to him, tried him and ran him off. He came back later, but he was tried and he was run off because he was teaching false doctrine. And that's why it says, I know thy works and thy labor and thy patience, and how thou cannot bear them which are evil. And thou hast tried them which say they are apostles, and are not, and hast found them liars. What apostle? Just completely looked over, isn't it? And it's the most important message that Christ gives about what went on in the Middle East after he was crucified, after he left the stage. Who came in and took over? Why was Stephen, who was actually called James, why was he stoned? Was it because James was about to take over? The brother of Christ was about to take over where Christ had left off, but that could not happen. Well, Rhino had to come in out of Rome, the original Rhino, and change everything in the Bible. Who changed the laws? Christ said, I did not come to change any law, not one. But who said that it was okay to eat to eat pig meat, to eat pork? Who said you didn't need to fast? Who said you didn't need to observe the Sabbath? I know thy works, and thy labor, and thy patience. Thou cannot bear them which are evil, and thou hast tried them which say they are apostles and are not, and hast found them liars. Guys, liars always get caught because in that lie they can't remember the truth. So as they repeat it, it changes. We're going to look at that also. But who was the apostle that Ephesus, or that church, tried? Let's look into that. Now, this is about the book of Revelation. It's a commentary. It says the trial of who? It says of Paul by the church at Ephesus. This is what Christ was talking about. Who had tried them that say they are apostles but are not. He also said, he warned that they are Jews that claim to be Jews but are not, and are the synagogue of Satan. But this was about Paul. It says the book of Revelation contains a commendation for the church of Ephesus for having tried them which say they're apostles and are not, and have found them liars. Who this person was is not stated, but all the evidence points to it being Paul, who wrote the greater part of the New Testament. Guys, there's many churches, and you can get the New Testament without any of the writings of Paul. And so many people, you're cringing right now because Paul changed the writings of Christ so much that the modern day churches are not based on Christ. They're in his teachings. They're based on the teachings of Paul, the original rhino. But the church of Ephesus got it right. It says, this study looks at the background behind the trial and examines the book of the New Testament that appears to have been written as the case of the prosecution, or case for the prosecution in the trial. The church at Ephesus was one of the strongest in the region then known as Asia, later to be known as Asia Minor. The location of the 6 churches to which the book of Revelation was written. Remember, I showed you a map in the series about Revelation of where these churches were, and we even looked at some of the temples and stuff that were there. It says the location of the 6 churches to which the book of Revelation was written. Paul's first and hurried visit for the space of 3 months to Ephesus is recorded in Acts 18, 19 through 21. The work he began on this occasion was carried forward by Apollos, Aquila, and Priscilla. On his second visit earlier in the following year, he remained at Ephesus for 3 years, for he found it was the key to the western provinces of Asia. He had to come in behind the original message and change everything, just like we see now. Getting the statues taken down, getting the books destroyed, getting history erased. It was happening then too. It says, here's a great door, and effectual was opened to him. It says in 1 Corinthians 16:9, and the church was established and strengthened by his diligent labors there. Acts 20:20 through 31. From Ephesus the gospel spread abroad almost throughout all of Asia. The word mightily grew and prevailed despite all the opposition and persecution he encountered. Why? Because he was teaching against Jesus Christ. Christ said, I did not come to change any laws. Paul continually tried to change that. Paul said that Christ spoke to him. Is there any proof? Paul lied about it twice in the book of Acts, how the event went down. And some say Luke was writing that. It doesn't matter. It is lies. Let's look at that. Let's go to Acts 9, and we'll go to Acts 22, and I'm going to show you something. And I'll tell you what you could do as we go there. If you can remember, in which chapter was it talked about the road to Damascus? When Paul was struck, he was struck down, he was blinded. Who can tell me that chapter and verse? Or is there 2 that mention that in the book of Acts? Let's go there a moment. Now, Acts 9:1 is called the conversion of Saul, his original name. He was a rhino from Rome called Saul. He was sent there because James picked up the crown, some call him Stephen, and was about to continue to teach about Christ. Because if it wasn't for the true disciples of Jesus, Christianity was going to fade out, because after Jesus resurrected, many people went on their way in one direction or the other. But his disciples, who he told to go and teach, they kept it alive. Saul could not have that. He had to make changes in it, and that would become the basis of the modern day church, not on Jesus, but on Paul. Think about how much doctrine is written, how many verses is written that quotes the book of Paul's writings. Think about that. It says, and Saul, yet breathing out threatening and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord, went unto the high priest, and desired of him letters to Damascus to the synagogues, that if he found any of this way, whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound into Jerusalem. He wanted them dead. He killed Stephen, who was James, who was to become the new leader, the brother of Christ. And he journeyed, and he came near Damascus, and suddenly there shined about him a light from heaven. And he fell to earth and heard a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? Now the words are read here. I don't think Jesus said this. There was no witnesses. None of the true disciples were witnesses to this happening. This is exactly what someone like out of D.C., a rhino, would do. And he said, Who art thou, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, who thou persecutest. Is it hard for thee to kick? It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And he trembled, and he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what wilt thou have me do? And the Lord said unto him, Arise, go into the city, and he shall be told thee what thou must do. Perfect story, except it was a lie. And the men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. Now these were not the disciples. These were a group of his men with the same agenda. What did they say? The men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. Remember that. They heard the voice, but they saw no man. Let's go to Acts 22:9. Now this goes to the modern saying, if you repeat a lie long enough, people will believe it's the truth. Except many times when you lie and you keep repeating it, you step on your own feet, stick your foot down your mouth, because you cannot tell it the same way, because it was a lie to start with, and it was still a lie. Let's look at this. 22:9. I fell into the ground. The same story. Had to repeat it again. Same story. I fell into the ground and heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And I answered, Who art thou, Lord? And he said unto me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. Acts 22:9. And they that were with me saw indeed the light and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. Now, what just happened? 9:7, they did not see. But in Acts 22:9, they did not hear. Which was it, Paul? Which was it? Like I said, guys, you can get Bibles without the teaching of Paul. You can get the New Testament without it. You lose nothing except a bunch of confusion, including the rapture doctrine, including the breaking of the laws that Christ said, I did not come to break any. This goes back to the trial of Paul. It says, but things went terribly wrong with Paul in the churches of Asia, including Ephesus. The disagreements between Paul and those in church leadership there are reported in Acts 19:8 and 9. And he went into the synagogue and spoke boldly for 3 months, reasoning and persuading concerning the things of the kingdom of God. Why did he have to do that? Why did he have to persuade and reason? They already had the message of Christ. But when some were hardened and did not believe, but spoke evil of the way before the multitude, the way is the name by which the church in Jerusalem was known. The difference between Paul and the leaders of the way, namely Peter, James, and John, are played down somewhat by Luke in the book of Acts. But read the epistles, and their doctrinal differences were huge. Acts is recorded from Luke's point of view, and he believed Paul's doctrine was the way. You understand? Luke believed the lies. Notice that those who rejected Paul are men of the synagogue and not atheists or pagans. Now, what did Revelation 2:2 say? That the church of Ephesus tried those that claimed to be apostles, but were not. They were liars. That's what Christ was, the positive message for them. They knew who Paul was, that he came after him to change everything. Again, guys, if you want to stop watching the channel over the truth, go ahead. But it's going to burn inside you till you look it up for yourself. 2 Timothy verse 1:15, Paul writes, "This you know, that everyone in the province of Asia has deserted me." Why? Why did the churches that Christ set up? Why did they desert Paul? Asia, all of them rejecting Paul, and when he says this you know, it sounds like this must have been relatively common knowledge at that time. In other words, everyone knew the churches were rejecting the Roman. But over time, thanks to the Roman Catholics, who actually came from this entire setup, guys, thanks to those and people like Constantine, they came in and whitewashed the true teachings and put Paul's in place so that a lot of things would be hid. And they were. Books were taken out of the Bible, except Paul's. Many books. Enoch, Jasser, many books, except Paul's, by the people that sent Paul. Said, but now after rejecting Paul, God had chosen them and them alone of all the churches of the first century AD to give a special revelation to. Paul did not say that Asia had rejected Jesus. Obviously, they hadn't rejected Jesus if they were thriving churches there that God wanted to address through John. Instead, Paul said that all Asia had rejected him personally. Why? Because they knew the truth, and now it's been so washed down, and Paul is taught by every preacher out there not knowing the truth of who he was. By the way, that's why you never see me mention or even respond to a comment about Paul or the writings. It's also corroborated in Acts 21:27-29, where men from Asia accuse Paul of teaching against the law. Now, when they say men from Asia, guys, again, a lot of people think the churches were all right around Israel. They weren't. They were, again, Western Turkey. Again, accused Paul of teaching against the law and bringing an Ephesian friend into the temple. And when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him, crying, "Men of Israel, help. This is the man who teaches all men everywhere against the people, the law, in this place. And furthermore, he also brought Greeks into the temple and defiled the holy place." This trial of Paul must have been a major event in the first century church in that history, but it has been swept under the carpet and remains largely forgotten. Paul is reversed today as being one of the greatest evangelists of all time. Every Christian church outside of the Roman Catholic Church bases its belief on his teaching. Why doesn't the Roman Catholic Church? Because they sent him. They knew that it was a lie. His key doctrine that salvation comes by faith in the atoning work of Jesus is the cornerstone of modern Christian theology. So it is hard to comprehend that this same Paul was tried in his day by one of the churches he pastored, that he was found guilty by them of preaching heresy and being a liar, and was forbidden to preach in that church ever again. Not only that, but in the only revelation known to have been given by Jesus to a first century church, God commended them for putting him on trial and finding him guilty. And that's exactly what we just read. Guys, this is just the beginning of a seed of thought that I'm planting in your head. How many of you know that the Thessalonians 4 is a lie? That there is no rapture? That we are here to see the tribulation of man? Christ said it 3 times. Luke 21, Mark 13, Matthew 24. In those days after the tribulation, you shall see the Son of Man coming. After tribulation, we will not be here. We all hope for the wrath of God. That's what Christ said. Then comes the wrath of God. First, the tribulation of man by man. Look at these so-called men that are infested with demons and what they're doing to us on this planet, all over the planet. Again, this is a seed. I hope you take the time to look at it reasonably. I know many of you already know this. And if you type in the trials of Paul and why Paul was rejected from many of the New Testament teachings, you're going to find scores and scores of volumes of information. I never trusted him from the first time I ever read any of it as a child. It did not flow the way the words in red did. The teachings of Jesus, that flows. The words of Paul was always a contradiction, always a lie. Again, God's law was not to be changed. Christ said that. But Paul, he said it's okay to eat swine. Great mistranslation in that chapter. You don't need to fast. You don't need to observe the Sabbath. All of those were things he said you didn't need to do. The exact things that Christ said you did need to do. Observe these things. I did not come to change one dot of the law. But Paul comes in, has James killed, the new leader, the brother of Christ, steps in with his doctrine. Imagine how simple the New Testament would be without all of that from Rome. We're watching it, guys. You watch it. Again, I hope you have an open mind to this discussion. We're going to continue with this and the book of Enoch. I'll be going in from surgery after the weekend, and we'll kind of get everything kicked in on the book of Enoch after that, because I want to pull in Paul and Bob for that, because they are the experts in that book. Now, again, keep an open mind. Why did Jesus say what he said? Let's go back, just to refresh your memory, to Revelation 2:2. Unto the angel of the church of Ephesus write, These things saith he that holdeth the 7 stars in his right hand, who walketh in the midst of the 7 golden candlesticks. I know thy works, and thy labor, and thy patience, and how thou can't or cannot bear them which are evil, and thou hast tried them which say they are apostles, and are not, and hast found them liars. You just read about the trial and who it was. Rethink what you thought you knew. Stick with the words of Christ. It's a heads up. Be safe.